The United States is not a republic, but a corporation. That is the subject of today's video. All right, this is Pablo, host of SYDLIS, which stands for Shit You Didn't Learn in School. And like the title suggests, I kind of go over things that you probably didn't learn while you were in school, or if you did learn it while you were in school, they really glossed over it and didn't really try to teach you like the real meaning behind it. It was like some kind of check mark they put on their list of things you got to make sure you memorize. But regardless, real quick, before I get started with the video, I just want to point out that I also have a podcast. You can find me on Anchor or any one of these sites: Breaker, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, or you just go to my website and I have all the episodes up there. So I just posted an episode called The Global Chief Federal Postal Court Judge. That's a real thing. All powers attorney and fraudulent language in legal documents. And in this particular episode, I go over something that you kind of need to watch this video first in order to understand this. So it's why I decided to make this video, because if you don't know or understand that the United States is actually a corporation and not actually a republic anymore, then you're not going to understand this stuff. So with that being said, I like to start off a lot of my videos with some definitions. So let's start. All right. The Act of 1871, that is exactly what changed America from a constitutional republic to a corporation. Now, let's just read the vanilla definition of what Wikipedia tells us, because I'm not a big fan of Wikipedia, but they do give you the vanilla definitions of things. And their vanilla definition of this is, they call it the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. The District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 is an act of Congress that repealed the individual charters of cities of Washington and Georgetown and established a new territorial government for the whole District of Columbia. Though Congress repealed the territorial government in 1874, the legislation was first to create a single municipal government for the federal district. Essentially saying, people don't understand that Washington, D.C., it's not his own state. So the kind of thinking behind creating Washington, D.C. is the federal government needs to be somewhere within the country that is not beholden to state laws. It has its own separate territory, so that they can govern and not try to pass laws in favor of. Because, like, let's say Washington, D.C. was a state, and they wanted to pass certain laws that, would make it, they would have a little bit of say-so in the federal state law. So let's say Washington, D.C. was a state, had its own state legislature, own state Congress, all that. And they wanted to pass a law that would affect the federal authorities in Washington, D.C. Well, they don't want to have to worry about what the states are passing. They're federal. They think they're above the states, so they don't want to be part of that. And they want to be outside of the state government. So they created its own separate territory to treat the federal government like its own sovereign, almost like its own sovereign nation. Because in reality, when you look at what this law really did, they don't really explain it all that well in school, or, you go to Wikipedia, they don't really explain this. But what that act did, it didn't just create Washington, D.C. What it did was created two U.S. constitutions. Yes, folks, that is correct. That act essentially created its own separate kind of government. All right, it's not really a government anymore. It's like I said, it's a corporation. With that being said, let me just read you through the basic kind of explanation for how that's even possible, or why it's even possible, why it happened. All right, so let me just give you this. This person's interpretation was, it was the first Constitution was suspended in favor of the Vatican Corporation in 1871. Quick little tidbit for people to understand how the Vatican works. Vatican is considered its own country. It's not considered a city. It's not considered a building. It's considered its own country. All right. It's the smallest country on the planet because it sits within the borders of Italy, and within it, it's got its own constitution. I mean, not its constitution, but it's got its own laws. It's got its own customs. It's got its own everything. And it's funny that they bring up the Vatican here, because the Vatican essentially is also a corporation, folks, because any city-state where they're not part of the nation which they're physically in, they've set themselves up as a corporation under their own rules and laws, and they're almost kind of trying to make themselves exempt from laws. But let me just explain to you what this did. Okay. So, since 1871, the United States President and the United States Congress have been playing politics under a different set of rules and policies. The American people do not know that there are two constitutions in the United States. The first, penned by the leaders of the newly independent states of the United States in 1776, that's the one we all know about. On July 4th, 1776, the people claimed their independence from Britain and democracy was born. And for 95 years, the United States people were free and independent. That freedom ended in 1871 when the original Constitution for the United States of America was changed to the Constitution of the United States of America. Now you're probably thinking, what the hell is the difference? It literally sounded the same, right? Well, there's a very subtle change, all right? If you read the first one, it's Constitution of the United States of America. You notice that the C in Constitution is capitalized, but the United States part of it is lowercase, and only America is capitalized. The reason for that is because we used to be the territories, the Republic of the American Colonies. There's a couple other names, but the United States of America, when they capitalized all of this in a legal document, what they essentially did is they labeled this title, the Constitution of the United States of America. They created a corporation with that one subtle change, because any corporation has to be in all caps. All right, any legal document. Whenever you read any legal document and you're looking at a company name, it's always like Google Inc. All capitals, all right. Apple, all capitals. Facebook, all capitals, all right. It's whenever they put in all caps in a legal document, that is essentially calling it a corporation. Now, how can they have pulled this off without anybody knowing? Well, it's because I'll get to that in a sec, but let me just keep reading what this did. All right. You also got to remember, this is 1871. This is only a few years after the Civil War. The country was kind of in shambles. They're in the middle of the restructuring of the South and all that. There was a lot of things going on in this time period, and it was really hectic. They just had a president assassinated just a few years before then. The country's still kind of like not at its best, and it's still rebuilding. So it was a perfect time to introduce something like this, because I think people are too concerned with other things that I think, especially the civilians, they had no idea this was going on. But essentially, the Congress realized that the country was in dire financial straits, so they made a financial deal with the devil. No shit. International bankers. In those days, the Rothschilds of London. What? Thereby incurring debt to said bankers. All right, so what they said is the Congress realized that because of the Civil War, the country was broke. They needed to make a deal, and what they did is they chose to make a deal with the devil, which was the Rothschilds of London. All right, the international bankers. All right, the globalists, the people that are not tied to a specific country. All right, the deal they made was they'd get paid, but they'd have to incur debt to these bankers. Today, those banks are the central banks. All right, the Federal Reserve is a central bank of the United States, and there are central banks in other countries. And these are the international bankers, all right? So we got our Congress made a deal with the devil in 1871 to incur debt to these bankers in order to get money from them. The conniving international bankers were not about to lend a floundering nation any money without some serious stipulations. So they devised a way of taking back control of the United States, and thus the Act of 1871 was passed. With no constitutional authority to do so, Congress created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia. With the passage of the Act of 1871, a city-state, a state within a state, called the District of Columbia, located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington, was formed with its own flag and its own independent constitution, the United States' secret second constitution. Yeah, this is some other stuff. But either way, what they're saying is Washington, D.C. is a city-state, which means it's not actually part of the United States. Washington, D.C. is technically a foreign country within the borders of the United States. All right, so it's not United States, folks. Everything run from Washington, D.C. is essentially run by foreign countries, all right, by international bankers. International bankers, aka people like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all these other people that got their hands, those really up their families that people hear about. I think London, England is only like a less than 100 years from when they lost America. They had a chance to take back America, but not through war, but through the banks. They hopped on that opportunity. This learning about this just reminds me of that part in Wild Wild West. Remember that movie with Will Smith and a couple other actors? I don't really forgot their names, but that part, like that movie takes place just a few years after the Civil War, and that part where like after the bad guy comes out with the spider and it blows up the army and all that, and they're pretty much putting the United States up for auction because they were pretty sure they had the United States on, like they'd captured it. That was essentially like their victory tour. Like, all right, how are we gonna split up the country? That essentially really did happen. It just didn't happen in that dramatic freaking way. It happened in the subtle way of like, all right, what banks are taking what banks are controlling what. We really did lose the country after the Civil War. The Civil War did break up the United States, and the Constitution of the United States Corporation, United States LLC, became the law of the land, and we've been beholden to bankers ever since. Because if you look at the amendments, the last amendment was abolish slavery, which was in 1865. That was the last amendment passed under the old Constitution. And according to some sources, every constitution after that, which is all of these, are null and void because it was under the new fake constitution. So this right here, the 16th Amendment permits Congress to levy an income tax without appropriating it among the various states or basing it on the United States Census. Why did we leave England? Remember the Boston Tea Party? About the whole thing. America didn't like being taxed by a dictator. So in the original Constitution, income tax is illegal. It's illegal. They don't like our money all going to the government when the government doesn't do anything for it. But after the United States Corporation became a thing, okay, we're reintroducing income tax because in this new Constitution, it's not illegal because this new Constitution, it's written in something called fraudulent language. All right. It's written in something that essentially all the language you use for laws, all the language used for legal documents like mortgages, bank accounts, opening credit cards, all the language they use in those types of documents, it's fraudulent language, meaning it's all corporate language. All right. These are all corporate entities. Okay. These are all corporate type things. These are not how constitutional republics are supposed to work. We've been running as a corporation ever since 1871. All right. Now, this one has a lot to do. This site has a lot of different info, but apparently almost everything about our society is, I want to say rigged, but it's not what we think it is. Like, did you know that your birth certificate is not really a certificate proclaiming the date and time of your birth? It's a receipt. Your birth certificate is a receipt because the bankers own this country, and by extension, they own us. All right. And since these international bankers own us, they want a receipt for every single person that was born so they can keep tabs on all of their assets. All right. Why do you think you need a birth certificate to open up a bank account, to open up any kind of legal avenue, mortgages, loans, all that stuff? You need a birth certificate for that because that's your receipt. That's your proof that you are an asset and you're going to join the system of the central banks to help put money into the system. All right. That's how they work. They get us through the slave labor, these 9-to-5 jobs, that's slave labor. People don't look at it like that because, hey, we're getting paid, we're allowed to do what we want. But no, 9-to-5 jobs, that structure is, I think we all can agree that kills people over time. That's not how humans are supposed to function. That is not a way humans are supposed to live their lives that way. Okay. Everything within this corporation has been skewed in a way to make it seem like it's legal, but in reality, they're functioning off the same way a corporation would act. All right. Now, this person wanted to, I guess, clear the air and kind of showcase that the Act of 71 was actually repealed. And I know I said it was the Act of 71 to do it, but this guy brings up a good point. This is more a semantics, but I want to read you what this person was explaining. The Act of 1871 was repealed. The Act of 1871 was indeed passed in 1871, repealed in 1874, then by piecemeal, finally revived and passed in 1877, implemented in 1878. It had precious little to do with us. It was actually a restructuring of one of the foreign federal subcontractors to better avoid culpability for the profit from crimes and the same guilty parties that already committed against us. After the Civil War, the victorious Union Army that fought for the Northern Confederation reorganized what was left of the federal territorial government to settle the bankruptcy Lincoln started in 1863, which he declared the day after he issued his first ever executive order, General Order 100. Among the other things prior to Act 71, the Scottish Commercial Corporation merely called itself the United States of America Incorporated, foised off its corporate articles of incorporation as the Constitution in 1868. So they formed a substitute entity, a foreign commercial corporation, named it after us, and started doing businesses in our names, impersonating us and illegally accessing our assets and credit starting in 1868. So it actually goes a little bit further back to 1871. And in 1871, they began the same process of impersonation for the District of Columbia, and by creating the District of Columbia Municipal Corporation. Call me old-fashioned, but the switcheroo that took place in 1868 is what should be of most concern to us Americans, and only secondarily should the colliery fraud taking place in the District of Columbia concern us. So he stated that the 1871 was specifically for the creation of DC, and using the tactic they made in 1968 of pretty much substituting the corporation law as our Constitution. They just did it again for the District of Columbia. So either way, he says, in both cases, the actual government was usurped and our assets seized upon illegally and unlawfully via members of the U.S., the Congress pretending to represent us, and all operated under the conditions of non-disclosure, fraud, breach of trust, and deceit. That they weren't allowed to speak on it for legal reasons. To put it bluntly, instead of functioning as our deputies in the office we defined for them, these post-Civil War retrobates evaded that responsibility and began operating as trustees of our state assets and as our purported proxies, voting for us in their own corporate shareholder elections. So the election going on right now, what they're essentially stating is the way the laws in this corporation is set up is that we're not actually a republic, because in republic you don't vote, you elect people. In republics you elect people. In corporations you vote. All right. So the reason I'm always saying we vote, it's because we're a corporation, folks, and they vote for us by proxy. So all those mail-in votes going on right now being shipped around the whole country, those are vote by proxy on your behalf, and your state is voting on your behalf for the candidate of their choosing, because your vote doesn't really matter. All right, because it's not a real legal process. It's a corporate process that they put in place to trick us into thinking that we have democracy. This goes deep, folks. All right, this goes deep. Yeah, they never told us a word about all these arrangements being made for us and in our names. The actual American government was thus bypassed and settled into dormancy while our employees contrived to become our masters. Literally. Yes, the Act of 1871 is a window on the process of this criminality overtaking a foreign subcontractor of ours, but that's hardly our concern. A subcontractor of ours should choose to reorganize its own internal affairs and decide to incorporate its business, and it's no skin off our nose, is it? What is really important about the Act of 1871 is that it shows that what went on in Scotland and America in 1868, all without our knowledge or permission. So what they're saying is, it was originally in Scotland this corporation started. They just transferred over here, renamed it the United States, put it all capital letters, and pass it off as our own constitution. Now, here we go. This person explains a little bit. The Organic Act of 1871 with notes. All right. Uh, okay. In Drake's update, he was asked when the United States of America was formed. This is the act that was created in 1871. That is why when the changeover comes, we will be going back to Republic of 1870. He's speaking of something called NESARA, which I'm going to do a completely other video, separate video on. I've already talked about it in my podcast. I'm going to check out that episode. But that's a whole nother video, which I'm probably going to be doing following up to this one, because you kind of need to know this stuff first in order to appreciate what NESARA is going to do. But in a nutshell, NESARA is going to undo a lot of these shenanigans I'm speaking of, and it's going to do a hell of a lot more than that. But like I said, that's a whole other video. And what he's saying is the changeover, we'll be going back to the Republic of 1870. The Constitution of 1870 only had 13 amendments at that one time, with the 13th Amendment being the original 13th Amendment or Ton Amendment. There will be no 14th Amendment, which is what used for anchor babies and restores a Bill of Rights removed in the Slaughterhouse Act, slaughterhouse cases. No 16th Amendment, so no income tax. No 17th Amendment that changed the appointment of senators by the state legislators, guaranteeing states' rights to a general election of senators. Representations are by general election for the people's rights. This will restore the checks and balances between the states' rights and the sovereign's rights, just as reinstituting the original 13th Amendment, disallowing lawyers to hold public office, restores the checks and balances to the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, because having lawyers, i.e. people from the same organization or club, can collude to guarantee that certain acts or legislation will be enacted and survive. Lawyers and anybody with the power of attorney have special powers within corporations, which is why the original 13th Amendment was about disallowing lawyers any skin in government, because a lawyer within this corporation is basically someone that can change the laws as they see fit because they're an attorney. All right. That's how deep this goes, that all the lawyers that we have in Congress and any lawyer I've ever had as a president, they've had this secret power in their back sleeve that allowed them to pretty much bend the laws in whatever scenario they saw fit, which is why we're seeing all these election laws being changed at the last minute. It's them exercising their corporate powers. All right. You know, I'm probably have to do a couple more follow-up videos of this. I just want to make this quick one. I just want to introduce the concept of America not being a republic, but a corporation, because the more and deeper you look into it, the more you realize that a lot of stuff we are taught is completely wrong. Like our birth certificates are receipts for every person born. Mortgages, I've heard this is something I'm gonna follow up on, but mortgages are called death pledges. All right. One, I get it, because some people, it takes damn near till they're dead to pay off a mortgage, but also because you're signing over this thing called all powers of attorney. When you look into that, it's greater than general powers of attorney. You're essentially signed away all your rights when you buy a mortgage, when you open a bank account, when you do any of this stuff. All right. I'll do a follow-up video on that subject, because that's pretty juicy stuff right there. And in order to understand that, you have to understand that this is not, we don't live in a republic, people. You know how they say, oh, this is a democracy. People would correct them and be like, no, America's a republic, not a democracy. Well, you could correct those people and be like, well, technically, we're neither of those. And America has essentially been operating as a corporation ever since 1871 or 1868, whichever date you want to go off of. It's been 150 years. America has been a corporation for roughly 150 years. And with this thing he's talking about, NESARA, that's going to undo all of that. And I will talk about NESARA in my next video. So I end this one here. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the info I'm bringing to you, if you like these kind of subjects, please like, subscribe, whatever channel you're watching this on, because I'm posting these on YouTube, but it's probably like the last one I'm using right now. I'm on all these other sites like OogTube, Rumble, BitChute, all this other stuff. I just joined Gab. Gab's pretty cool. I just joined Gab. I'm with Gab TV. I also got an account over there in Gab. It's pretty cool. I like the crowd so far. I'm learning stuff. So you can find me on those different sites. I have links in the description. Share this with people to start getting them in the habit of realizing that they've been lied to. All right. I have all kinds of videos about fake news, about this whole scam-demic we're living through right now, and the whole kind of like a theme of my channel is just educating people on all these subjects that they don't know anything about. I mean, I barely knew about this up until recently, but it makes complete sense with everything we're seeing right now going on. So I feel like it's important. It's people need to see this information, and I'm just willing to be the person to explain it. So I'll leave it there, and you'll have a good day.